Dr. Bensong risked everything when he used the quantum leap accelerator to travel back in time. Now our team's working to find out why. As he leaps between bodies with no memory of who he is, he still has one hope. That his next leap takes him back.
Welcome back, everyone. This is Dave from Corman Productions with my co-host Stacie, here to talk about the new Quantum Leap Revival, Season 1, Episode 14, titled S.O.S. The episode's description reads as follows. Ben leaps onto a battleship during War Games in 1989. He must navigate a dangerous rescue mission, but also contend with his commanding officer, XO Alexander Augustine, otherwise known as Addison's father. The episode was directed by Chris Grismer, who was also responsible for What a Disaster and O.E. of Little Faith. And the episode was written by Dean Gorgarius. That's the person who liked one of your tweets.
Yeah, he actually liked another one yesterday.
Did he?
Yeah.
Unfortunately, you can't ever quite remember what his name is. But
I can't say the name.
You can't. I that was my best guess on that one. I've never actually looked up the pronunciation, but that's my best guess. All right, so before going any further, I'll tell you a couple of things. One, this is not a spoiler-free podcast. If you haven't watched this episode, I highly recommend you go and check it out, and then come back and give us a listen. Secondly, if you are on one of the platforms that this podcast is now available, please follow. You can also head over to my YouTube channel, Corman Productions, where additional content can be discovered, both Quantum Leap related and otherwise. If you're already on my YouTube channel, please hit me up with a like, share, and comment, as well as subscribing to my channel. Kelly M. ended up responding to your comments from last week about NBC's weird programming, specifically concerning La Brea. And she said that The Voice is starting up again, which will air on Monday and Tuesday nights.
Started last night. So The Voice is one of those shows that does air multiple nights a week. So it is taking Monday and Tuesday at 9. So that does explain why they were in such a rush to wrap up La Brea and get it out of the way to make room for The Voice.
That's something that we could have figured out if we looked into it on our own, but thank you, Kelly M., for pointing that out.
Yeah, I figured that out as of yesterday when I saw The Voice was on. I was like, oh, okay.
All right. So, Stacie, your thoughts on this week's episode?
I absolutely love this episode. I think they knocked it out of the park. There was a lot of really great stuff. In fact, I'm not even sure I have any real criticisms of this episode.
No?
Usually I have plenty of criticisms. And let me note that, I'm not a fan of war stories or the military stuff or heavy action sequences. And this episode has all of that. But regardless of my disinterest in that, I thought it was an amazing episode. Between, the personal stuff that we get into, I thought that Addison did amazing in this episode. And I think that there was this really great balance between the leap and the project stuff.
Yeah, actually, I thought how they did the project scenes this week is how I want to see them do the project scenes in the
It was beautiful. Throughout the episode, we had all this, really cohesive crossover back and forth, which most of the time isn't the case. Most of the time it feels like they're just cutting in the random bit of the story they want that week, and it's not even connecting to what we're doing. Even when it is, it just feels disconnected. This felt perfect. Yeah,
going forward in the next season, season 2, I would actually like to see how they do the project scenes in the future. So you actually had a conversation with Adam, as we promised.
Yes.
We did that. We pre-recorded that. You had a little interview with him. So we're going to listen to that real quick.
Okay, so I just watched the episode, and now I am here with my husband, Adam, who's going to give us a little historical insight on the setting behind this episode.
Hello.
So, Adam, welcome to Corman Productions podcast on Quantum Leap.
Hello.
And it's good to have you here with us.
Yes, I'm glad to be here.
You haven't been watching the new show, which
won't let me.
As our listeners know, I won't let you watch the new show because we haven't finished the old show yet. But we are getting there. We're in season 4. And are you enjoying the original Quantum Leap?
I mostly enjoy it for the clothes.
Yeah. Adam likes Al's clothes and wants all of Al's outfits. And I veto that.
She won't let me get good clothes.
Okay, so Adam is a history buff and knows things that Dave and I do not know. So, can you tell us, since we don't know these things, about the battleship that we're talking about here. This episode takes place on the U.S.S. Montana, and you had an interesting tidbit about that.
Yeah, so the U.S.S. Montana was never actually built. I believe, having not seen the episode, that they used the U.S.S. Iowa as the filming set for the episode. So the Iowa is one of 4 sister ships, the Iowa class, all of which still exist today: the Iowa, the New Jersey, the Missouri, and the Wisconsin. It was one of a planned class of 6 ships where they only ended up building 4. The Montana class would have been the next class of battleship and would have been significantly larger than the Iowa class. Like, for example, how the Iowa class has 3 sets of their 16-inch guns. The Montana class would have had 4 sets and would have been much larger, much more powerful. This ship was prepared in advance of World War II, but after the Battle of Pearl Harbor, when the effect of an airstrike on battleships was seen, and then especially after later battles such as Midway, the United States Navy switched its priorities from building more battleships to building aircraft carriers. So that meant that while they did finish the 4 Iowa-class battleships, they ended up canceling the last 2 Iowas and also canceling the Montana class. So the Montana itself never existed, but it's an interesting choice that they picked that name.
Yeah. Having watched the episode, I can see why they picked a fictitious ship, because, what happened through the course of this episode was presented as being, something of historical significance that didn't really happen in our timeline. And we've seen that this new series does that a lot, where it touches on actual history, but then makes things happen that didn't really happen in our timeline, such as Atlantis, that the Atlantis ship never actually had any missions the year that episode was taking place.
The space shuttle, you mean?
Yeah. So this is similar to that, I think, where they're like, oh yeah, we're representing something from real life, but we want to make sure that we're not, saying something happened that didn't happen with a real ship. They didn't want to imply that this ever really happened by naming an active ship.
So this episode took place in 1989,
1989,
correct?
Yeah.
So at that point, we are near the end of the service lives of the Iowa-class battleships. The Iowa and the New Jersey had either retired or very close to retirement at that point. The Missouri and the Wisconsin would go on and fight in the Persian Gulf War and be retired shortly thereafter. So it would have made sense, at least I thought when I first heard about this, if they used the Missouri, which is a very famous ship. It was the location where the Japanese surrender was received at the end of World War II. It also, a movie that was set around the same time period, Under Siege, with Steven Seagal, was also set aboard the Missouri, and I don't know how similar the plot lines are, having not been allowed to watch the episode, but...
Well, I know why they picked the Iowa.
Oh, for filming, you mean?
For filming, yeah. And that's because it is actually located in Los Angeles.
Yeah, that's correct. It's docked at, I believe, Long Beach, or around there.
I saw that it's in Los Angeles Bay somewhere as a museum ship. So if you want to go visit the site where this episode was filmed, you can go do that in Los Angeles.
And you can actually, all 4 Iowa-class warships are museum ships now. So you can find one of them possibly near you. The Iowa, like we said, is in Southern California. New Jersey is docked right outside Philadelphia. And actually, Stacie and I have visited that ship a couple times.
Twice.
Toured it extensively. Yeah, I think I enjoyed it more than you did. It was a nice hike all the way up to the bridge and back.
No, I didn't like that. That was scary. I don't like heights.
So you're surprisingly familiar with the design of the ship, so it must have seemed kind of familiar.
Definitely a couple of the scenes I could clearly tell were filmed actually in the ship, where they were running through the hallways and climbing over, is that called the bulkhead? Where they have to climb over the things.
Yeah, they leave that step there so that you can create a watertight seal.
And
with
then
the door.
Going down the scary like ladder chain things,
Yes.
which you and I going up and down those took like 5 minutes each one.
Yeah,
And in the episode, they're like running through and chasing and just like sliding down the chains. It looked painful to me.
So we said New Jersey is it's on the New Jersey side of the Delaware River next to Philadelphia. The Missouri is docked in Pearl Harbor, and the Wisconsin is actually down in Norfolk, Virginia.
Okay.
So you can visit any one of those ships.
So
There's also many other fine museum ships in the country of other older battleship classes, aircraft carriers. They're worth a look.
All right. So if you're interested in that, seek out one of those locations and you can go check it out and tour these spots yourself. And so that tells us a lot about the setting here of where Ben is on this ship. The main difference being that the Montana would have been bigger.
Significantly.
Yeah, so this is as close as they could get for filming purposes to that.
Yeah, it would have been impractical to build an entire battleship just to film this episode.
Yeah, and I don't know how many of the scenes were actually on the ship and how many were on, sound stages. Like I said, clearly you can tell when they're running through the interior, and I'm guessing some of the bridge scenes were all done on the ship. But, a lot of the deck stuff, clearly the background CGI'd, so I don't know how much of it. I'm sure some parts of it were not filmed on the ship.
It would make sense. There are a lot of those quarters from being on the New Jersey are actually really tight quarters.
Yeah.
It would be hard to film just because you couldn't back the camera up enough.
Right. Okay. So that is the history behind this ship that doesn't exist and similar ships and the ship that it was actually filmed on. And thank you for talking with us and sharing your knowledge. And we will hear more from Adam in the future of Corman Productions Quantum Leap related stuff once he gets a little more up to speed on what's going on in the Quantum Leap universe.
Yeah, I understand that the clothing choices are not nearly as good in the new series, so I'm very disappointed about that.
There is no 1980s clothing, no. But Ian dresses pretty extravagantly for our modern time.
Al has the most extraordinary
I think you would
wardrobe.
like Ian's wardrobe if you have to pick one. All right, so I'm going to get back to talking with Dave, and thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, and we're back. Thank you. That was very informative. Thank you, Adam. Welcome to the podcast. That was your conversation with Adam. Any more thoughts before we get into the actual episode itself?
No, let's hit it.
All right, so Ben leaps in onto a battleship, as we saw last week. Ben says, "Oh, ship," and is intercepted by someone who brings him to where he needs to be. Ben runs around trying to figure out what he's supposed to be doing, and eventually it is revealed to be war games that he's in.
Yeah.
And it turns out he's third in command of this ship.
He's third in command. And, this is what I was questioning last week. Remember, I said, well, are they really at war? The trailer made us think he's in a war.
Yeah, the trailer covered like the first few seconds of this episode.
Okay, the trailer, and I have a problem with this. I don't know, I'm going to blame it on NBC, though. It's not a criticism of the episode.
Right.
It's a criticism of the trailer, and I think NBC's who put those together.
I'm sure, probably. Their promo department.
So not only was the trailer misleading, we already knew based on the episode description that it's war games, but the trailer was like, oh, I'm in war. That quote that Ben says, "I leaped into a war," isn't even what he said in the episode. Like, even that quote was edited from what we saw.
Yeah, I noticed that with an episode of This Is Us, actually more than a few times, but there was a scene that they included in the trailer that wasn't in the episode at all.
Yeah.
And the context for that eventual scene was completely wrong.
So Ben's actual quote, which is in just a moment, when he's talking, when Addison gets there, he says, "I thought I leapt into the middle of a war." In the trailer, Ben says, "I leapt into the middle of a war."
Mm-hmm.
So it was a very misleading trailer. I have a problem with that because people are going to have a problem with that. People don't want to be misled into what they're watching.
Right.
So cut that out.
Yes.
Okay.
I wholeheartedly agree. And I forgot to mention at the top that this episode actually had some thematic connections to Crimson Tide, which was a Gene Hackman, Denzel Washington film, it had some of the same kind of themes of like the captain and the XO being at odds with each other. We are introduced to the captain, Bill Drake, and XO, Alexander Augustine. Addison's father, played by Brandon Routh, who we talked about last week. He played Superman in Superman Returns. Addison gets Ben's attention when things calm down. And Ziggy, of course, doesn't know why they are there because Ziggy is running slow.
Yeah, Ziggy's running slow, which is funny because the second Addison realizes... Okay, so she hears the captain's voice over the intercom. And she immediately knew who it was. She walked in the room. You could tell on her face she already knew. There's the captain that she knows. There's her father. Because this captain was her father's, like, mentor his whole life.
Well, it's funny because actually, I don't think she recognizes him as the captain immediately. She recognizes the speech.
She recognized the speech, but then something clicked.
And then something clicks in her head.
But she walked in and she instantly said, "That's Captain Bill Drake, and that's my father."
On the Montana, no less.
Yeah, she knew. She knew the setting immediately. And in the next scene, we'll see she knew the date immediately because this is played off as being some like I said, some historical significance. She knows it. And Magic will tell us soon, everyone who's in the military knows this story. Right. So why did it take Ziggy so long? Why was Ziggy so slow that Ziggy couldn't figure out just by the date, which we obviously know because we're connected.
Right.
The whole team should have automatically known what's going on.
That's one of two major criticisms I have of Ziggy's work this week.
I feel like Ziggy had zero presence this week.
No, Ziggy really didn't do much of anything. We cut back and forth between Ben and Addison talking about that, and the project talking about that.
Yeah, and this is one of those scenes. It was beautiful.
Yeah, absolutely.
I loved it.
They were having the exact same conversation that we were basically having last week. Like, if we're going to change something major about Addison's life, how is that going to affect things? Now, Ian comes to this really weird conclusion.
Ian took the stance, which, this was kind of foreshadowing for the episode. Like, okay, we're not going to cause some huge time ripple within our project, which I was a little disappointed of, honestly, that we didn't get to see a little bit more with that.
Right. I don't know how that would have fit.
Yeah. So we did not get a Leap for Lisa moment, like I thought, where we completely break Addison's timeline, although Ben and Jen were both really concerned about that happening.
Right.
Ian, who we always know, we got to listen to Ian. Ian's the voice of reason. They always seem to be the ones explaining to us, well, here's how it works. With our new science, within here's what's canon now. Ian is the voice that tells us that. And Ian took this stance that, contrary to popular belief, you can't, changing something in someone's past isn't going to have these giant consequences for the people around them.
I thought that was a really weird stance to take.
It was a really weird stance to take, also because...
I mean, isn't that the premise of this entire
That's what
series?
I'm trying to say. That's literally what Quantum Leap is you touch somebody's life for one day, make one change, and it affects their entire life and their family's entire lives.
So yeah, I found that little moment from Ian to be very, very weird for this series. Magic ends up giving us the date, which is May 2nd, 1989. We find out that Ben is the operations officer, third in command, as I mentioned. And being in the Navy means that he can't be seen talking to himself.
Right. About time.
Yeah, that's okay in any other situation.
Now, this has been a criticism of people watching the show, is that Ben and Addison don't ever seem to care who they're talking, where they're talking, who's hearing them talk to each other. And very specifically, Addison's like, you're in the military, you can't do that.
Right, but you can do that anywhere else. I hate to break it to you, Addison, but that's not okay anywhere.
Yeah.
I mean, I talk to myself quite frequently, but, anyway, I don't have full-on conversations with myself. Yeah.
So her advice to him is, well, what's going to be most suspicious, besides talking to yourself, is staying in one place too long. So just keep moving. Walk around the ship.
Look busy. That's a strategy I employed back when I was working at IGA and I didn't want to actually be assigned anything. I would just walk around with purpose like I, was already doing something so that no manager would actually tell me to do something. And you'd be surprised how often that actually worked. Anyway.
Yeah, so Magic and Addison continue to tell us what happened on May 2nd, 1989.
Which, in the supposed timeline, because the timeline that we know is not actually accurate.
The historical record states that a stress call comes in at 1900 hours.
And Augustine ended up ignoring the distress call, not even telling the captain, and as a result, a lot of people ended up dying. and his reputation was left in tatters. And I think he left the service at that point.
She had said that he was encouraged to leave active duty, so I took that as he took a desk job.
Okay. I thought he was like removed from the service altogether.
So yeah, the stress call was completely ignored, but in reality, it came from the U.S.S. Tampa, which was a submarine, a U.S. sub doing a secret mission. Nobody knew they were even there. And this is all happening right near China. We've already been told we're in the East China Sea, which is where the Montana is meeting up with. There's like a bunch of different ships competing in these war games.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's why they're closest by to the Tampa and why they're the ones receiving this distress call. And 138 sailors on that ship all died. And of course, the team instantly figures this is what we're here to do. We're here to stop this. And so we didn't get that debate, right?
Well, we sort of got it.
I thought we were going to get the debate on, are we supposed to make changes in our own lives?
Our personal lives, gotcha.
Right, in our personal lives.
Instead, the debate is whether we should be influencing an event this big.
Right. But see, here's the thing is, this didn't come down to, do I do what I'm supposed to do, but do I also make a change in my own life?
Mm-hmm.
Like, let's say Leap Home Part 2.
Right.
Where he was there to save save Al.
I mean, when it comes down to it, that's technically what he was supposed to do.
Like, they figured his mission was to save the POWs.
Get the POWs, correct.
And he took the side mission to save his brother.
Mm-hmm.
And it was this battle of, do I do what I think I'm here to do? Do I also do something personal? Not knowing that the other thing was actually personal too, but that's besides the point. Here, the thing that they had to do literally would affect Addison's life.
Yeah, absolutely.
So there was no like debate of, well, while we're here, should we try and fix things or should we try not to change things? But it was more literally like, oh, doing what we have to do is going to change things.
Right. Addison takes a stance though that he was a cold man and that nothing will change him leaving her and her mother. She also has an interesting phrasing when talking to Ben. She says, I am here to save these lives. Not you are here, Ben.
Right.
You can save these lives. I can.
She said she's given this opportunity to save these lives, and they died because of her father. So she's convinced she's here to right her father's wrong.
Mm-hmm. And
she's taking it very personal.
Yes, and it was interesting that she phrased it that way, like inactively saying that she was the one that was going to save his lives.
And that makes you think also, remember, she's the one who's supposed to be the leaper.
Right.
And I almost feel like you can feel some resentment in her that she's not getting to make this impact on history directly.
Right.
Which is what she signed up for.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely in the subtext, not so much in the text. The captain is preparing to fire a warning shot at a Chinese sub that's trailing them. And he keeps referring to them as the Han, which I'm assuming is some kind of racist remark as far as the Chinese people are concerned. He seems like a somewhat racist, somewhat sexist man. We get a little bit of hints of that throughout. Augustine ends up talking him out of it. And when the captain leaves the bridge, the Master Chief says that the captain is getting worse, which is a reference we don't quite understand.
We've got some foreshadowing there that something's going on with the captain. Also in that scene, just something I wanted to note, is we got this lighthearted discussion where the captain is kind of schooling the other officers in trivia about the U.S.S. Montana and asks them, do you know why it is specifically 127 feet tall? And nobody knew, including Ben, of course, because Ben wouldn't know. And Addison was like, I don't know. I was in the Army. She doesn't know. And I just found it interesting. He said the reason that is because the ship was built in Brooklyn, and that was the height of the Brooklyn Bridge. It had to be able to fit under the Brooklyn Bridge to get it out of the bay.
Mm-hmm.
So the U.S.S. Iowa, which is the ship we're filming on, was built in Brooklyn. So
I'm kind of curious, why not just make this the U.S.S. Iowa then?
Well, Dean did confirm on Twitter, he was live tweeting during the episode, that they were required to use a ship that wasn't commissioned by the the Navy.
So that's why they did not go
right. So they had that requirement from I don't know if it was the government requiring that or NBC required it, but they specifically were instructed to use the name of a ship that's not a commissioned Navy ship.
Interesting.
But the USS Montana, which was never built, that Adam talked about, was not built in Brooklyn. It wasn't built anywhere, but it was scheduled to be built in Philadelphia.
Oh, okay.
So it wouldn't have had that height restriction if it had been built. So yeah,
Okay.
it seems they are definitely more talking about the Iowa class ship here than
Gotcha.
the Montana.
Okay, that makes sense. Augustine pretty much is quick to shut down the Master Chief, saying, "Hey, look, enough of this. We're not talking about the captain this
Yeah,
way."
he's defending the captain, which he'll continue to do throughout most of this episode.
Addison comments that this is the most he's ever upset that he's ever seen her father. Do they have a relationship at all at this point?
All she's told us really is that her relationship with both her parents is complicated.
Right.
And
I was hoping to get a little bit more insight.
we definitely
into that.
learned that he left them,
Mhm.
right? And based on the context of this episode, I think that happens soonish. So she was very young when he left. But she must have continued to have some relationship with him because otherwise she wouldn't have so much to talk about from
Right.
his...
You don't generally have very many memories when you're 2 years old.
Yeah, so they must have continued to have some relationship, even though it was strained and, her parents were separated.
While in command of the bridge, they get a distress call. There's a debate by the others about whether to answer this distress call, thinking it might be like a Chinese ploy.
Yeah, they couldn't even make it out. They weren't even sure it was English.
Right, and I think it was part of it was the signal didn't last very long or something along those lines.
Yeah, it was a broken signal. It didn't repeat. And, we already know, Ben already knows who it is, but they have no idea.
Right. So, much to Ben and Addison's surprise, Augustine decides to answer to the distress call.
Yeah, he says, we can't turn our back on a distress call, no matter where it's coming from.
Addison wonders, well, what did they change? And that would be something that we would often wonder.
Yeah, well, I think I picked up pretty quickly. I even wrote, did he take the fall for the captain?
Yeah,
and
that's
I
pretty
mean,
much what it's determined.
That's exactly what it comes out to be is, Alexander Augustine is not the one who made the decision not to respond, like the official history says. And this shocks Addison. She had never got any inkling that this wasn't true. She literally her whole life thought her father's the one that made this decision that caused all these people to die.
So, as it turns out, my thoughts last week that Addison would end up learning things about her father that she didn't understand back in the day would actually ends up playing true in this episode.
Right.
We see the captain come out instantly to overrule his XO. Meaning the history we were told is not accurate, which we were just talking about. It was the captain who decided not to investigate, not Augustine, and Augustine ended up taking the fall.
Yeah, and the captain's pretty convinced that this is the Chinese, it's some big trick, and it's a trap.
Mm-hmm.
And he's very convinced throughout this whole episode that the Chinese are trying to sabotage. Which, is it entirely wrong?
I mean, I don't think he is totally wrong.
He's not totally wrong, but the Chinese weren't after them. The Chinese were after the sub.
Right.
But
in the future, Jen asks, if the history was wrong about this, then what else were they wrong about?
Mm-hmm.
Magic decides to reach out to an old friend who is in the Chinese government or something along those lines.
It's a friend of Magic's.
Right.
Jen convinces Magic to call him.
To get the perspective on what happened from the Chinese's side.
Right.
Ben gets info from the project on how to determine where a distress call came from, whether it was the Chinese.
Something to do with the header of the message. I don't know what that means.
Yeah, there was a lot of technological stuff in this episode.
Yeah, and this is the first time that we see Ben talking with, what was his name?
Walker. Yes.
So throughout the episode, Ben communicates with Walker.
And we don't see him.
Audibly, not
Right.
visually.
And so they end up determining that the distress call was genuine. And so they set course to save the ship. All seems well, but then the captain orders torpedoes fired at the sub that was trailing them. Ben reacts by telling the captain that he's starting a war, which the captain doesn't take too kindly to. Addison instructs him to apologize and to basically say, what did you catch what he said exactly?
Just to apologize and say, yes, sir.
Yeah,
and
okay.
basically, you're not allowed to talk back to your commanding officer.
Right. Which, of course, Ben would not realize because he's not actually a part of the military.
And, this whole thing could have been resolved really easy if he would have just leapt into the captain.
Right.
Why was he leapt into this person?
I'm not sure, to be honest with you. I can't think of a single...
It's definitely not the path of least resistance.
No.
Unless the captain wouldn't let him in, since we're going with that.
Which is a theory that we've had. The captain informs them that it was just a warning shot.
Yeah. But, Augustine points out, well, yeah, but you used a live torpedo.
Yeah, so we're questioning the captain's
Everyone knows that the captain has lost it.
Mm-hmm.
But Augustine's going to defend him no matter what.
Right, and we'll get into the reasons why in a little bit. Magic goes and talks to his old friend. His old friend says that he's glad that they are talking because they weren't in 1989, and something bad almost happened.
Yeah.
And I would actually say something bad did happen. But I guess he's referring to something worse.
He was saying, well, this could have been the start of World War III, which, I mean, at this point, I guess that could be because Ben's already started to change things.
Yeah.
And is already on a path where that's a possibility, right? So we go into this thinking, oh, it was this huge thing, 130-something people died, and you're here to change that, which is a bigger impact than leaps usually have. Like,
right, absolutely.
Saving 130-something lives... Go a couple generations down the line, that's thousands of people. I mean, we talked about that Salvation or Bust, that was a huge historical impact, bigger than we ever saw in the original series. This is comparable to that. I mean, you're not going to see the ramifications as much until you get further into the future, but that's huge to save 130-something people in one shot.
I would level the same criticism that you did at Salvation or Bust, but we at least had that conversation at the beginning of the episode, debating this.
Yeah, but I mean, also remember, these are young men. So they're going to go on and have families that never existed.
Right.
Like, that's a big impact.
Definitely a bigger impact than this series generally dabbles in.
And also, since we're talking here about his Magic's conversation with this Chinese naval officer, whoever he was, I didn't write his name down.
Neither did I.
It makes me wonder, and I don't want to get into a political discussion, but right now, in real life, U.S. and China are a little
tense?
Little tense, right? There's some political unsettledness right now. And I honestly wonder if that plays into why we had a 2-week hiatus, pushing these episodes back.
And what are you referring to?
I just think that they wanted to delay airing this episode.
To avoid, tensions.
To see if anything worse was going to happen in the last couple of weeks.
Ah, gotcha.
There's been tensions. There was the whole balloon incident.
Right.
And I'm wondering if NBC was nervous to air this episode, and they wanted to push it back and put a little more time and distance between
that makes sense.
When this was originally scheduled to air, which was 2 weeks ago, and then they've pushed everything 2 weeks.
That's interesting. Maybe.
And maybe even as much as maybe they edited a little bit of the context. Maybe it was even supposed to be more questionable what they had to say in this episode.
I'm very curious why they chose the Chinese for this episode. I don't know. It's kind of... Is it because of what's going on in current...
Well, I mean, no, because
times?
this would have been filmed months ago.
Right.
That's why I'm wondering even if they might have tried editing a little bit of the dialogue from
possibly
what it might have originally said. That's just a speculation on my part, that there was some concerns over, the overall thought of what is happening in this episode.
Okay, that's interesting. Ben and Augustine talk. Ben brings up his daughter, and Augustine emotionally talks about her.
Yeah, and right before that, we open that scene with Addison standing in her father's office.
Oh,
she found her handprint on the wall, and she puts her hand up to touch it. That was beautiful.
Yes, that was a very nice moment.
It's like she's trying to touch her handprint. Of course, she can't touch it. She goes right through it. But she was like, you can tell she is having a lot of emotions right now.
And of course, who wouldn't at this point? And it's good that she gets to hear what Augustine has to say.
Yeah, he says when Ben asks about your daughter, he says, Addie's perfect. And the look on Addison's face was like, it was like, I've never heard you tell me a compliment before. She had no idea that her father ever thought she was perfect.
Right.
She's got daddy issues, which
Right.
I talked about last week, comparing this to Donna's daddy issues with her military father that left her when she was young. It's a very mirrorable circumstance. I don't know if I just made up words.
I mean, you might have, but it still makes sense anyway. The captain, or the commander rather, ends up pivoting to whether Ben is trying to get himself kicked out of the Navy by questioning the captain in the manner that he is. Augustine reveals that his father was a drunk, and that the captain helped him be something more than what he was.
Right, so he said he almost killed his father when he turned 18, finally had it out with him, and that's when he left, joined the Navy, and Captain Drake was the one who's always been there for him. He was his Al.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? He was the person that was always there for him. He became his father figure within the military and has worked under him for 20 years and basically says, my life would have been horrible if I hadn't met this man.
And that is the reason for the loyalty that he shows him throughout this episode. And even though the captain is clearly kind of losing it, and everybody kind of gets that.
Oh, and also Addison, I don't think she ever heard the story about her grandfather and
Probably
her father's
not.
history. She said, my father never talks about his family. So she had no idea what challenges her father had overcome, in getting out of and breaking that pattern of not being an abusive alcoholic husband and father. So she thinks, yeah, my dad sucked, but she didn't really realize the ways that he was better than his father.
Right.
I mean, and this also kind of made me feel like touching on the This Is Us storylines a bit, where we're dealing with, Jack's father was this abusive alcoholic man.
Yeah, absolutely.
And, just seeing how things change from one generation to the next, how everybody, we talk about parenting styles a lot, how everybody's goal is to just be a better parent than their parents were. And sometimes, things work and sometimes things don't work.
Not so much. But I mean, as Addison will point out later in the episode, she turns out pretty okay.
Yeah.
Augustine ends up basically saying, look, we're not going to talk about the captain like that, and basically dismisses Ben, even though Ben doesn't really end up agreeing with what the commander says.
Well,
here.
Ben has to figure out a way to change things, and if he's to just stand there and shut up, he's obviously not going to be able to change anything.
Right.
So he's got to convince either the captain or Alexander Augustine to make a change here. And being the third in command under those two, he doesn't have any power if those two don't agree.
Right. Which is another reason why perhaps this person was not the best person.
Was not the best person, yeah.
But, if he had left into the captain, that would have been way too easy.
It would have been too easy. Right. But if whatever is leaping him really just wanted this to be what happens as we save things, he would have leapt into the captain.
Right.
And it would have been easy.
Alone, Addison says that although she is seeing a side of her father that she didn't see as a kid, she still doesn't understand why he was so cold to her as a kid.
Yeah. So she's seeing him and, their whole family history from a new perspective. And it's confusing to her. She's having a hard time processing, well, why was it the way it was? If he really loved me and thought I was great, what happened? Like, I thought my father hated me.
Right.
And then she has a line that I wrote down. She called Ziggy an incredibly fickle AI.
Yes.
I liked that.
Yes, it is very true to the original Ziggy in the original series. The Ziggy interrupts to say that the ship isn't that they're trying to rescue, which is called the Tampa, doesn't end up getting rescued. And they soon find out why, which is that they now have a hole in their hull.
The Montana was just hit. And Ben's like, oh, the reason we don't make the rescue is because we sink?
This is the other part where Ziggy falls down on the job. Okay, you realize that the ship doesn't get rescued, but you don't know that the reason is because this ship ends up going down.
Didn't make it there.
Right.
Yeah.
Maybe Ziggy just didn't have a chance to explain, but I think that's another example of Ziggy not being great at Ziggy's job.
This version of Ziggy's not great.
I mean, to be fair, in the original series, Ziggy left something to be desired as well. But especially bad in this series.
But in this series, I feel like Ziggy is more of an afterthought. Ziggy really doesn't contribute a lot. And I really hope that we change that.
Yeah, hopefully in the second season, or maybe even at points this season, we could alter that a little bit. The captain ends up believing that the Chinese sub attacked them. And Augustine isn't convinced and
Yeah.
tries to get
Augustine
Ben.
says that he doesn't think it was a torpedo.
No. He tries to get Ben to prove that theory wrong so that they don't blow the Chinese sub out of the water and perhaps escalate tensions here to full-out war. In the future, Magic realizes that the Chinese mined the ocean waters, but the weather pushed some of the mines out directly into the war games that the Montana was in. In the future, Addison helps Ben prove that what they got struck by was a mine and locate them with the help of Walker.
Now, and this was another example of where we were bouncing back and forth between the past and future scenes in a very cohesive scene. Everything made sense. It makes it harder to talk about it because they were just bouncing back so much. But it looked better. It played better.
It absolutely did. And that's what, like I said, the project scenes mixed in with the Leap this week beautifully. Yeah,
there was less
done.
separation between them, really. And it was that conversation Magic had with the Chinese guy saying, he told us, here's what really happened. This was their version of the story is they were trying to kidnap that sub. They wanted to take all of those sailors hostage, prisoner. What's the word? The right word?
That sounds about right.
I guess prisoner.
Prisoner would probably be more accurate.
And they wanted to dismantle the sub and steal the technology. That was their goal.
And Magic ends up being impressed.
Yeah, he said, that was actually a really good plan. I mean, they weren't trying to kill them.
Right.
They were trying to steal the technology. And it was an accident. Like you said, the weather went sideways, which is why all these mines got loose in the ocean. And I don't know, why at this point did the Chinese not blow up the mines? They know they've just polluted this whole part of the ocean with these mines.
Well, it's a good question. What we end up seeing is that I think the Montana had to be in close proximity of the mines to detonate them. So the Chinese would have to travel into this area to detonate the
You
mines.
think they would have done something to take care of it, that they accidentally just polluted the whole, this whole area of the ocean with, I don't know how many mines. And they did it on accident.
Right.
You'd think they'd want to clear that up, not just leave them there forever until something blew up on them.
Right. Some innocent passengers on a cruise ends up getting blown up by mines. I mean, yeah, you have a good point. I'm not quite sure I have an answer.
Maybe
for
they
that.
just hadn't gotten to it yet.
Yeah, maybe at that point they hadn't gotten a chance to do it. Okay, so so they figure out it was mines.
And Magic calls Jen to tell her, hey, we found out what it was. It was Ben's heading into a minefield. And she goes, that's great. Which I thought was
And she didn't mean that sarcastically.
No,
she
and you know
actually
what?
meant that.
I'm starting to really like Jen a lot. I was leaning toward Ian being my favorite character in the team. Jen is really stepping it up for me. I love all of our characters. I think they're
absolutely.
this is a great team. There's nobody who I'm like, ugh, I don't care about their scenes. I love everyone. And Jen has really been having some great moments for me. So she was like, that's great. And then we instantly jump back to Addison telling Ben, and Ben goes, that's great. And you can really see throughout this episode, Ben and Jen are on the same wavelengths about their thoughts and their feelings on different things.
Well, it's great because next week we're going to get some interaction between the two of them,
yes,
it sounds like. So,
for the first time.
Yeah, and that's pretty rare between the two series, that we get interaction between someone other than the main hologram person.
So, like you said, they work out this way to detect the mines, and we get another interaction with, what's his name?
Augustine? You talking about the captain?
Walker.
Walker, okay. With the help of Walker, they end up, and Walker's kind of a funny character. I can't really talk about him too much because most of his scenes I don't understand the tech behind it.
Yeah, it was all very Ben and Walker this whole time were like, oh, we're the masterminds. We're right. And nobody else seemed to understand, but it makes sense.
Including myself,
It makes sense that, that's his job,
right,
so you figure that that's why this is working.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we'll learn later there's more to it than that.
Right, absolutely. But even though that they proved that it's mines and not a torpedo, the captain doesn't care. The captain still thinks it was done on purpose.
Right, because he says, well, who do you think put the mines there?
Right. Doesn't realize that this was an accident, so he wants to blow the other sub out of the water.
He says, we're not going anywhere till I sink that sub, which is a very drastic stance to take.
Yeah, I'm not a captain and a sub, so...
Everybody on both ends here are positive that means World War III.
Right.
There's no way to avoid World War III if the captain makes this happen.
Addison's father ends up going to the bridge to stop the captain. The weapons officer is preparing to fire, but Ben tells him he's making a mistake. And the weapons officer instead launches the anchor, which stops the ship somehow. Well, because it's an anchor, but...
Well, it was Augustine that did that.
Oh, Augustine did that? I thought it was the weapons officer that did that.
I'm pretty sure Augustine did that, and that's why they locked him away.
Yeah, I didn't realize that. I thought the weapons officer decided to do that, being won over by Ben, and I didn't understand why they were punishing Augustine for it.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure he's the one that hit the button.
Okay.
And then the captain tells them to confine Augustine to his quarters and says, "You're going to Leavenworth."
Right, okay.
Which sounds like a way worse thing to happen for Addison.
Yeah, you would
than
think
her
so.
father just leaving is him going to a military prison.
I mean, that would probably impact Addison's future career if she had a father that went to Leavenworth prison.
Yes, right.
Military prison, which is what that is. So, yeah. That's not really brought into the episode, of course, though.
Yeah, because that didn't happen. But the threat was there that, hey, maybe we are going to break Addison's history here.
Addison reports that Ziggy says if they fire on the other ship, there will be war, and which everybody already knows, but that's a dramatic way to go to commercial break.
And now, I did know, because Augustine's been confined to quarters, that makes Ben second in command now.
Right. And it also means that the XO, Addison's father, who has some control over the captain, now doesn't have that control at all.
At all, right. So now it's just Ben.
Right. Jen informs Magic that instead of changing Addison's future, actually I think they might be doing both at this point, they may have accidentally started another war.
Yeah, and this was a heart-to-heart. Now, this was Jen and Magic. We have to have those heart-to-heart moments. And it was them really talking about, what are we doing here? And Magic's little dialogue during this scene, it was great.
He quotes Martin Luther King.
He says
that the moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends towards justice.
And he also was talking about, in not so many words, God or fate or time or whoever is controlling the leaps. He definitely made reference to, we're not in control of this. Ziggy's not in control of this. Whoever, whatever is leaping Ben. And he didn't say, but he said, it's the same thing that Sam was dealing with. And
it's funny because the series up until this point took the exact opposite stance.
Yeah, but we can see here Magic, and I mean that tracks, that Magic has this different perspective to the original project.
I mean, the person who doubted that was Ian, so that kind of makes sense for Ian's character, and this makes sense for Magic's character.
Right,
so.
That Magic's going to be more on the side of, well, here's what Sam dealt with, and I'm pretty sure that's right where we're at, that there's some force some force here that's doing this, and we have to trust that that force knows what they're doing and put us here for a reason.
In the past, the captain wants to attack the sub and send a helicopter to save the crew of the other ship.
Yeah, because at this point, another call has come in, and now the people on the ship know that the distress call came from the Tampa. Before, they had confirmed it came from a U.S. source, but they still didn't know exactly what the stress was. Now they know it's the Tampa, it's going underwater quick, and they need help now.
Addison ends up pointing out that a helicopter is only going to rescue about 10 people.
10 people at a time, and if this happens, 20 people total are going to get saved out of the 130-something, which is not a lot.
No.
And we're still going to get World War III.
Right. So a lot more people are going to end up dying. Ben tries to argue with the captain and wants to continue to do so, but Addison tells him to stop, saying that the chain of command, he's not going to be able to convince the captain like he would other people. And like this is, up until this point, this has been Ben's instincts. He's been the one that's been able to convince people to do the right thing.
Right.
But he's not going to be able to do that in this case. So Addison tells him that there's only one person that can, and that would be Addison's father.
Yeah, and not only because of his rank, because he's in trouble right now, but it's because of his personal relationship with the captain.
Ben goes to Augustine, and he starts talking about his bad relationship with his wife.
Yeah, he's having his own little breakdown. He's holding
I thought this was a little bit out of place.
It was a little bit out of place, but he's been confined to quarters. He thinks World War III is coming. He might think they're going down. He might die right now. You know, he might think that that's where we're at because he knows the captain's gone cuckoo.
Right.
So he's got a wedding picture of him and his wife. So we get to see an image of Addison's mother here.
Yep.
And so here's where we really get in on what's going on in Addison's childhood. And she doesn't know any of this. She's never heard any of this before. And so he basically says, my wife doesn't love me anymore. But she is too committed. She's not going to leave. She's not going to do what makes her happy because she, took a vow to be there for me. She's going to support me. But she's miserable.
Right.
And he said, the only way for me to make her happy is if I am the one that leaves. And this is where, Addison learns and we learn that's why he left. Not because he was an asshole and left his family. He left because that's what the wife wanted.
Right. He did it out of love, essentially.
Yeah.
And that's nice scene. I thought it was a little bit random when I was watching it.
It was a little bit random, but...
It's like, okay, buddy, we got some big things going on here and you're talking about your marriage all of a sudden. I don't know. But, what you say makes sense to me. Ben uses what Augustine says to convince him to go up against the captain.
Yeah, and that means mutiny.
And these scenes kind of play out a little bit unconvincingly for me. This is where we get the Crimson Tide feeling of the episode where now he's going to stage a little mutiny.
Yeah. In
Crimson Tide, Denzel Washington had a little bit more people on his side that could help him get to the bridge than Ben.
Right now it's just Augustine and Ben.
Right.
We don't know at this point if or who else might be on their side. Now, we have seen that people know the captain is losing it.
Right.
But we haven't seen anybody willing to stand up against him.
There's not enough suggestion that there's enough people willing to mutiny for this.
Right. Now, my question, was there not somebody on this ship with the power to say he's unfit for duty?
I mean...
without having an actual mutiny?
I don't know how that works in the military. In Star Trek, for instance, the doctor could
there was somebody who has the power over the captain. I guess that's not the case here.
I don't know how that works in the military. I don't really know enough about how that works.
It feels like there should be a system in place for when the person in charge loses it.
Goes cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs?
Yeah.
You would think so. I would think that that duty would fall to the second in command, honestly. But I don't really know enough about the military to be able to answer that. If there's someone who has more military experience than either one of us that listens to us, if you'd like to give us some insight into that, feel free in the comments.
So we get this chase scene, and watching this scene, I can clearly see, other than the stuff on the deck, this is the part that was filmed on the actual battleship, the U.S.S. Iowa. And this is where, and I mentioned this when I was talking with Adam, but you can see like the bulkheads that they're running through and the stairs that they're running down with the chains. And having toured a battleship and walking through those little narrow hallways, like this was crazy to see them running and going, down the ladders like that. And Ben even was like, wow, that was impressive when Augustine slides down the chain ladder.
You would think that you would get some practice doing that, drills and stuff like that.
Listen, it took me a good 5 minutes to go up or down one of those ladders, okay?
I think it would take me even longer, honestly. Actually, I think I would end up tripping and falling down the stairs, so it would take me... I would get down, but it would not be very pretty, I'm sure. Trying to run it, for sure.
But yeah, you can clearly see this is where, they took advantage of being able to film on an actual ship. I did read on Twitter that the bridge was all reconstructed on a set.
Oh, okay.
So that wasn't filmed on the ship. So I think it was literally these hallway scenes and then like the actual facade of the ship being on the deck with, of course, a CGI background putting us in the ocean.
Yeah, I think that was all used to very good effect, for sure. Augustine ends up making it to the bridge and starts arguing with the captain and somehow convinces the crew and his captain that he's right.
Yeah, but also Ben was caught during that chase.
Oh, yes, I forgot about that. Augustine ends up taking command of the bridge. The problem is the mines, but Addison gets the codes from Magic's friends with the help of Walker once again.
So when they were having that whole discussion, and when the captain backed down and was like, okay, like, there was this moment where, like, we saw the captain back down, right? They didn't have to, like, lock him up by force and take over the ship.
Mm-hmm.
They came to this understanding that he realized everybody was against him, and he stood down.
Yeah, I'm not sure, once again, how true this is to the military. Like, if that little scene would take place like that. But...
I mean, he gave Augustine, he was like, okay, you're in charge. He gave him the power. Now, if the mutiny had continued, it would suggest that they would literally have to, like, lock him in a room in order to take over power.
Which is kind of what happened multiple times throughout Crimson Tide.
Now, there was this moment where he looked down at the console and it had a reflective surface, and he was, like, looking in a mirror and he saw himself. I had this feeling there, and I don't know, maybe it was just me. I felt like it looked like someone had leapt into him. Not like visually effects, but like this moment where he's looking at an image of himself and then, oh, I give the power to you. It felt very like I could have bought that somebody leaped in just then.
You know, it's funny because the credits, opening credits, if you're paying attention, ended up spoiling the fact that Martinez.
And I didn't get spoiled. I was happy I missed that.
Yeah. But yeah, I kind of thought that at some point we were going to reveal that the captain was Martinez.
Well,
that's not how.
At this moment, like I said, like I got this, and I wrote it down too. I was like, the way he looked in the mirror, I felt like someone just leapt into him. And then I was like, well, we've already established that Ben and Addison would see a leaper, unless they were using a different technology. Like, I think that's the way they left it. The reason they were able to see Martinez in Salvation or Bust
same technology.
is because he came from the same version of the software that they're using. So maybe if someone was leaping from some different version of the software, like a Sam or an Aaliyah, maybe,
right,
we wouldn't necessarily see them.
Maybe.
But yeah, like I was like, wow, it feels like we got an assist here. And it might also be that I just recently rewatched the show Travelers.
Okay.
Where it's kind of similar concept to leaping, where people from the future take over the bodies of people in the past. But whereas in that show, our present is the past. And that's kind of what it looks like when someone gets taken over. They hold their head in pain because it hurts, but then all of a sudden there's a new person that just jerked in, and this person knows exactly what's going on. They know exactly where they're going, and they're able to influence the situation.
Now, the Traveler show that you're talking about, that's the one where the person was basically about to die.
Right,
when that
right. They would only take over the body of someone who was literally about to die anyway. So they weren't, because this was a permanent effect in that show. You couldn't leap in and out. Once you come, you're there forever. You've taken over their body. You essentially killed them. So
Gosh.
they made it a point to only go to people who were about to die anyways. But maybe it was the influence of just recently watching that show that this moment felt like somebody else just came here, Right. And I mean, there's no reason to think that other than I just like there was this moment. And I think what they really were getting to, it was this moment of self-reflection, where he realized, oh, maybe I'm not making the right decisions because every person in this room has an opposite opinion of me.
Right. And, I often say that if everybody's against you, then maybe you are the problem.
Yeah. Okay, so now there's no opposition within the ship to doing this rescue. As you said, now we've got to deal with the mines. And they said if they're going to avoid the minefield, it's going to take them 3 hours to get there.
And by that point, the other ship will have sunk.
Yeah, everybody's going to be dead by then. They need to get there as quickly as possible.
Addison ends up suggesting that they get the codes, the Chinese codes for the mines from Ziggy.
Yeah.
And detonate them, basically.
At this point, you have to wonder, why is anybody going to listen to him? And why would they think he has the knowledge to figure this out? Well, I mean, it makes sense once we know who he's talking to that they're going to listen to him.
Right.
But
right.
in reality, should anybody have thought that he'd have these codes?
There was a moment where Ben called to Walker and Walker wasn't responding, and then all of a sudden Walker was back again, which at the time seemed like a nothing moment, but then that turns out to have more significance than what we thought originally, and which we will of course find out at the end of the episode. But so they end up doing the math together and figuring out how exactly they do some complicated technological stuff that I couldn't possibly understand or tell you.
Yeah.
But they end up, as they drive by the mines, they use something to basically send the codes to the mines so that the mines will end up detonating.
Yeah, so that everything would blow up before they hit it.
Right, so that they won't die. They
do it.
Yes, they succeed.
And it gets really close. This is where we have a very action-y moment where we're seeing all these explosions out the windows, and it got a little too close for comfort by the end. They were like really close to a couple of them.
Addison ends up having an emotional scene with her father. Not really though, because they can't see.
Yeah, so she has this one-way heart-to-heart.
Right.
And she basically tells him, everything's going to be okay. I know you loved me. Everything's going to be okay. And the message gets through to him.
Yes.
Because he says, everything will be okay, which is exactly what she had just said.
You know what this moment reminds me of? That moment when Ben was in the talking to his mirror image, the priest in O Ye of Little Faith. And that makes sense because Chris Grismer, the director of this episode, was also involved in that episode.
Okay. And Dean, last name I can't pronounce.
Gregorius, I guess.
Had posted on Twitter that this scene actually was influenced by Deborah Pratt.
Oh.
She's the one who gave him this idea that, Addison could reach her father.
It's not without precedent. We did see that a couple of times in the original series.
Yeah.
Like Al with Miss Melanie in The Color of Truth. That's right.
Yeah.
That was a first season episode where Al was able to convince Miss Melanie to pull off and not get run over on the tracks. So we definitely have seen that throughout the original series.
Right. And it seems to be moments when, there's a lot of emotional connection where the hologram is able to get through to someone who didn't necessarily hear them. There were, of course, times when people could literally hear Al. But then there were these moments where the message just seems to break the barriers and get across. And, it was a beautiful moment between Addison and her dad. And I think she realized, like, wow, he might not have been able to hear me, but, I was felt.
Right. The message got through.
The message got through one way or another. And I have seen people also comparing this to the scene at the end of MIA.
Okay.
Where
Al,
Al, spent some time with Beth.
Yeah.
Where it's like this one way little discussion.
And it seems like when Sam leaps out and Al disappears, that Beth knows that Al is not there anymore because she stops dancing and she starts crying at that point. Right. So yeah, that is a very similar moment. I would have liked to have seen one more scene with Addison at the end. Maybe back at the project, reaching out to her father via phone.
And I think we'll get that. I think we'll get that at some point in the future. We'll see how this affects Addison's relationship with her father. Because, and even though, we confirmed this didn't really change her timeline, it's definitely changed her perspective now.
Right. Absolutely.
And also, this could have had impact on his career. He might still be active duty at this point.
Right.
He could be an admiral by now.
Yeah, that could have definitely changed things.
Yeah,
on
like
his end of
he
things.
could pop up in the future in a capacity that he couldn't have from the original timeline.
And I really hope they kind of do something like that along those lines.
And what I had to wonder is, did Al know Augustine or this Captain Drake?
Right.
Like, Al was an admiral at this point, 1989. It was just a few years before Quantum Leap would have started. I don't know if they were already working on Project Quantum Leap in 89 or if they were still on, was it Starbright?
Yeah,
Starlight?
the Starbright project.
Starbright.
Yeah, I'm not really sure.
But this
when
is like
was.
in that, wheelhouse where
Right.
we're in the late 80s and, Al was an admiral. He obviously would have had opinions on this day from the original history.
Right.
The way Magic described it as, everybody in the service knows about that.
Right.
And of course, we're not going to get any insight on that, but it could have been fun to bring Janice in for this episode and have her give us, oh yeah, my dad told me about this day and this happened, and get some insight on Al's perspective through Janice.
Speaking of Janice,
we haven't seen Janice again.
Yeah, so she's just like what, like chilling at the project, like in chains or something like that.
But I mean, I could see her giving us Al's perspective. I think it would have been nice to bring in at least mentioning Al during this, where we're talking about like something big happening in the Navy.
Something that Al definitely would have been aware of for sure.
Yeah.
All right, so on the deck of the ship, Ben goes to thank Walker, and Walker turns out to be none other than Martinez.
Yeah. And when Ben first was like, look, this is the first time he sees this person, and he gets this look on his face. Now, I thought what was happening in that first instant, because I missed the cue that Martinez was going to be in this episode. I thought Ben was reacting in a way that, oh, Walker is somebody Ben knows. I took it as this is somebody for historical significance to Ben's personal life.
Ah, gotcha.
I mean, that only lasted for a second until he told us what he was freaking out about. He was like, Martinez, and I was like, oh, that's Martinez.
And he looked substantially older than the last time we saw him.
Now, I didn't really have a comparison in my head of what Martinez looked like when we met him last.
The best way to show to distinguish his age is you can definitely see that his hair is definitely way grayer, whereas he looks way younger when we see him.
So you think it's been a significant amount of time?
Yes.
Since our current to whenever Martinez is.
Yeah, I think this is a way older Martinez, which is interesting because that means that Martinez is doing this for a really long time. Whatever is going on here.
Well,
he's been.
So you're saying from when we met him in Salvation or Bust?
Yes,
not necessarily when we met him in the future.
Correct. Yeah, what I'm talking about is when we saw him in Salvation or Bust, he looks younger there than he does here.
Okay.
So it seems to me that this version of Martinez has been leaping around doing whatever he's been doing for quite some time. Maybe even
and it
like
seems
a decade.
Interesting since we're planning on wrapping this up in 4 episodes.
Right. So maybe I'm off base there, but it seemed like...
Well, we do know that the version of Ian who leaps back...
Is way older.
Is recognizably older. So I guess that would make sense if those are happening around the same time.
Right. Makes sense.
And Ben is confused by this. He says, to Martinez, but you helped me today. Like, we worked together to fix this. Like, I thought you're my opposition, right? Like, Ben's looking at Martinez like Martinez is an evil leaper, trying to do bad things, and I'm trying to do good things.
The way Martinez talks, it sounds like he has sinister intentions.
Yeah, Martinez says, actually, you helped me. He says, I don't know if I could have pulled this off from where I was sitting today without your help.
And it sounds like he has bad intentions, but I don't understand how anything that happened here
and that's what Ben says. He says, I don't understand. And Martinez says, that is why I'm going to win.
Right.
So he says, I have an upper hand to you. You don't know what the game is why I'm going to win the game.
Right.
And it is confusing. Like, whatever Martinez was there to do was not in opposition to what Ben was trying to do. He was not trying to sink the ship. He was not trying to kill people. It doesn't feel like on the face an evil leaper assignment. Aaliyah was there to kill people and hurt people's lives.
Ruin people's marriages and stuff like that.
And, Martinez clearly wasn't trying to do that. He wasn't trying to start World War III because he's happy with the results of what they did. So what is he trying to do? We have no idea.
And, we now have 4 episodes.
And then Martinez leaps.
Yes.
So we got to see Martinez leap out and Walker come back in.
Which is the first time we've actually seen a person come back.
Right. So we got this moment where we get to see a person returning. And Walker's very confused. He says, how did I get here? What's going on? And I love that we got to see that moment, right? It's something we don't get to see a lot of. And we talk about a lot. Like, what's it like when these people come back? Right.
And that's something that... Mark Davidson, who I don't think he's actually managed to see this series because it hasn't aired in his location. But yeah, that's something that he often talks about, and what I often talk about as well.
So Walker says, I'm confused. And Ben says, I'm confused too. And then Ben leaves.
And then he ends up being confused again when he returns.
Now,
when the person who comes back.
Right. So I can just imagine immediately. Okay. So Martinez left, Walker's here. Now Ben left.
Mm-hmm.
And Rossi's here.
Right.
Can you imagine this next scene that we don't get to see where Walker and Rossi are both standing on the deck, having no idea how they got here, having no idea that they personally just stopped World War III, having no idea anything that's going on, and they're going to look really crazy to the rest of this crew.
These two were integral to this episode's events. I don't think Martinez was there the entire time. Like I said, I think he left in at some point later in the episode.
See, I was under the impression it was him the whole time.
Really?
The way they were talking about helping you today, and I wouldn't have been able to do what I had to do.
I thought it was Martinez because there was this moment where Walker wasn't on the line, and Ben was worried about that, and then Walker came back, and I thought that's the moment that Martinez left in, and that what they were talking about was the math that they needed to pull off the whole
just
finding
that
the
one particular thing.
Yeah,
See,
that was my
I took
impression.
it as it was Martinez the whole time that he was talking to all day long. Specifically because we never saw Walker until this moment.
Right.
Walker was audible the entire episode, but never visible. So that's why I took it that he was there at least as long as Ben was. But maybe not. I don't know.
Well, yeah, we're never gonna get a confirmation on that one way or another. Yeah. So, any thoughts on this episode that we didn't cover?
Again, I just think it was really beautiful. It was really well done. There were so many different elements to this, right? And I really loved it. I would put this in my top 3.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Of this series. In addition to Ye of Little Faith.
Yes.
Which I love mostly because of the setting and of course the Halloween element.
Both episodes done by Chris Grismer, so
and
he's a person worth keeping around, I think.
And then my third in the top 3 would be Leap Die Repeat.
Yes. Okay.
Simply for the thematic time loop element of that. I love that. And between those 3, I don't know if I want to rank them, but this is a contender. It's right up there. I think it was really great. It's honestly probably the first time that I'm not wait a minute, I have a problem. I mean, we had some little problems as we were talking about it. But
most of it comes down to not really understanding how the military works and not really necessarily feeling like it was portrayed all that well or accurately, I should say. More not really well, but yeah, I didn't really have any big issues other than the things I brought up, and they weren't really big issues. They were just things I noticed. Yeah. So yeah, I thought this was a pretty good episode. I think Ye of Little Faith is actually my favorite of this season.
Okay.
Number 1 at this current time. Maybe I'll watch them again and see how I feel after that. But as of now, I think that's my favorite episode this season so far. So next week we have the title Ben's Song for the Defense, and that episode's description reads as follows: when Ben leaps into a harried public defender, he must keep an innocent teenager accused of murder out of prison for life. In an unexpected turn of events, Jen puts her legal expertise to the test as she steps in as a hologram on this complicated leap.
Complicated. So the trailer was 15 seconds.
Yes.
It was the shortest little teaser trailer ever. And I watched this trailer so many times because everything was happening in the blink of an eye. And I picked up on Jen was there before. I did find that episode description, but not until after I was scrutinizing this trailer.
I was actually told that this was going to be a Jen-centric episode because Kelly M. read the description before I did, because I didn't realize that was out yet. So she told me that Jen was going to be involved in this episode before I watched the trailer or read this episode's description.
So I was just coming from a place of seeing the trailer. I hadn't found the episode description yet, which I did find later, but I was like, oh my goodness, I think that's Jen. I taking screenshots and I'm like, is that Jen? I think that's Jen. Because we could only see the back of her.
Right.
But she appeared twice in that 15 seconds. And
I didn't even notice her at all.
And
honestly.
I was like, wow, that's Jen holding that silly round handling. And I'm like, well, where's Addison? What's going on?
Right.
And I mean, it makes sense when you read that episode description that Jen has experience with the legal system. Now, Jen's experience with the legal system is not from the standpoint of a lawyer. Her experience with the legal system is the fact that she's been incarcerated.
Right.
So I'm curious how her expertise is going to be helpful here.
Well, we'll definitely see.
I mean, maybe she has a legal background, but I don't think they've told us that.
No, not that I know of. The only thing that I get the impression that I do know about her is that she's basically a hacker.
Yeah.
And that she has computer knowledge. So I don't know how that fits into the legal
right.
Arena.
As far as I know, her experience with the legal system is because she was tried and convicted of crimes.
Right. I mean, that's, one way to gain experience. Maybe she talked to her lawyer and, got some great insights on how to be a lawyer. I don't know. But the other thing that is of interest there is that Ben is once again leaping into a woman.
Once again, a woman.
I'm curious. I didn't look into it, but how many times has Ben been a woman so
far? A lot.
Yeah.
A lot.
Like, it definitely way more than the original series.
Yeah,
at this point, anyway.
At this, like, we're on in every other episode.
Right. So
over the last few episodes.
It's like 50%, like, over the last couple episodes.
Which, we were saying last week, that would make sense, because the population's pretty close to half and half.
Right. So they're just casually flinging Ben into
they're not
these
making an issue out of him, of what gender gender or race or anything of who Ben leaps into.
Mm-hmm. Which
is logical.
Yes. And I much prefer that over sometimes in the original series where the joke half the time was, Sam's a woman, and that got really old.
I mean, I can see there being moments where Ben wouldn't know how to deal with certain things.
Right.
And maybe they play that down a little too much at points, where it's like he doesn't skip a beat, where maybe he should skip a beat.
Right.
But not just with female characters. He should be skipping a beat with a lot of people, just because the things they're dealing with are so different than anything he'd have experiences with. Like
last week, being a chef.
Right.
All of a sudden.
He should have tripped over that a little bit more than he did.
Right. You had an interesting theory.
I have a theory, and I could be completely off base, but when I saw the trailer, that we get to see Ben's mirror image, and it's a blink of an eye. They show this woman in the mirror, and I instantly thought of a character from the classic series. And that character would be Teresa, the attorney from Last Dance Before an Execution.
Which, by the way, is a favorite of mine in the original series.
So I instantly thought of her. Both characters are attorneys. The clothing choices seem to put us in similar time periods. And I instantly wondered, could this be that same character? And I did do a photo side-by-side trying to compare them. They look a bit similar. Yeah. I mean, obviously they're not identical. You're not going to be able to pull the same actress in to play someone, who's now 30 years older. I don't have any insight on who that actress was that played Teresa, or if she is even still around and acting. But I did see some resemblance. And again, it's just the blink of an eye. We have literally a couple frames of this mirror image to work with, but I instantly picked up that vibe that could be where they're going with this. Do I think it's actually going to happen? I don't know.
It would be,
but I would love that. I've been saying over and over, I would love them to touch on people we've met in Old Leaps more often than they have.
And hopefully that is something they will do. Maybe they'll do it this time. We'll see on that one. We did note that it's possible that the ages are off.
Yeah, so in my mind, Last Dance Before an Execution took place in the 80s.
Yeah, that's what I thought originally.
It was actually 1971. So a lot earlier than in my head I thought it happened. And we don't have a date for next week's episode yet, but it looks 80s based on the clothes. But also I thought that was 80s, so who knows?
Right. Well, yeah, you also pointed out that the character in the original episode was supposed to be like 27.
She was 27 during that leap. The picture of her, though, she looks a lot older, and I'm guessing that actress was older than 27.
I mean, that's usually how it is.
Yeah, that falls on the fact that, television in the 80s and 90s, people often played younger roles than they really were. And nowadays, that's different, So when you look at media, people looked older in the 80s.
Right, yes. That's because you had, 40-year-olds playing high school students, usually.
And then that just continued.
Right. I mean, they do better with that nowadays, sometimes.
Yeah,
sometimes
but even in, actuality, people tend to look younger now than they did 20, 30 years ago. It's just there's been a whole change in like style and mindset about aging, you know.
Right.
People go out of their way to look younger now, and they didn't necessarily do that in the 80s.
Yeah, I'm just letting my hair go gray. I don't care how old I look.
So I think I don't know whether that's going to be the case or not, but definitely I think we can compare this to that episode, regardless if that's going to be the same character. We're dealing with a murder trial here.
Which I did point out is a little weird that a public defender is going to be dealing with that case.
It happens.
Yeah.
Public defenders defend people who can't afford to hire their own attorney.
Yeah, don't they usually like plea those cases out though if you don't have any money?
Not necessarily.
Yeah, I don't know.
I mean, that's up to the person.
Yeah.
If he insists he's innocent, then
Mm-hmm.
they want to go to trial. Then they can. They have that right.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, that's not the only legal episode that the original series did.
We had talked about this. I don't think it was on the air. That Sam had a lot of run-ins with the legal system.
Mm-hmm. There was the Last Dance of Execution, which we talked about. There was that one. It was a second season episode. I can't recall the title.
The one with the
Delilah.
Yes.
She was accused.
She was accused of murdering her.
It was like
the son of the family that she worked for.
Yeah.
And it was actually the mother that was a little cuckoo that accidentally killed her son.
Right. Yeah. That episode.
Yep.
And there was the trilogy that concluded with the trial.
Absolutely. He was a lawyer there. So that's 3 times. Well, 2 of those 3, he was the lawyer. In Last Dance Before Execution, he was the defendant.
Right.
Who actually got executed. He was somebody who actually was guilty of murder.
Yeah.
And I know there were other instances where trials were involved. Some of which he was the attorney, and other times he was involved in, other ways with legal cases.
Mm-hmm.
Whether directly the trial was part of the episode or not.
Right. So, yeah, next week should be interesting. It's that Jen-centric episode that you were looking for.
I knew that was going to happen. We're going to get some insights on Jen. I'm guessing we're going to get to learn a lot more about her past, since her past is what's going to be helpful to this case.
The only person that we haven't done a centric episode on is Magic. We got that one great scene.
We got, discussions on the Sam of it all.
Right. We haven't had a totally magic-centric episode. He's the one we know the most about, though,
right? Like, he's the character who is the returning character.
Right.
Albeit he had a small role in the original series.
Mm-hmm.
That's, where we are with Magic. And, we've got little tidbits, like we know he's pretty high up within the ranks. He has access to a lot of secret information. Not just in regards to Quantum Leap, but he was like, oh yeah, I can pull the records about the Hope Diamond, that nobody else has access to because of the time that I was in Washington. And he seems to have a lot of secrets that he's holding. And so, I'm sure they could do some great things, telling us some stuff about other things he's done in his life. But the gist of it is, he's a career military man, and of late, he's dedicated his life to reopening the project in a search for Sam Beckett.
Right. All right. Any other thoughts that you would like to discuss?
Yes. One thing I did want to mention is that fact that I was talking to you about on YouTube about last week's episode is that we missed something last week.
Oh? What did we miss?
You already know this. When we were discussing last week's episode, we failed to realize that the actress who played Rachel...
Yes, okay.
Okay, so Rachel's played by Alice Kremmelberg, and Rachel is Ian's ex-girlfriend, and we met her in Family Style. And
right.
I hope we get to see her again.
I'm sure we will.
In some capacity.
I'm sure we will.
And here's the deal. I recognized the actress. And I did, before the episode, look her up. I recognized her. She's actually in the most recent season of The Sinner.
Okay.
Which I just started watching that season, actually. She's central to that story. You ever watch that show?
No.
It's a seasonal anthology.
Okay, kind of like...
A little bit like American Horror Story, except that there's a centralized character that follows from season to season, who's the detective. So each season is him getting involved in some big mystery and getting too personally involved. And so that actress has kind of the lead as she is the mystery in season 4 of The Sinner.
Okay.
And I recognized her.
Mm-hmm.
And independently, I've seen pictures of Mason Alexander Park with their partner.
Okay.
But I did not put 2 and 2 together.
Right.
When watching this episode and when we discussed it last week. So
well, when you see pictures, they tend to look a little bit different than they do when they're in.
Yeah,
the
I hadn't put 2 and 2 together, and it was actually last week I was listening to our podcast after you posted it, which I do, sometimes to listen back, and we were talking about Ian's tattoos.
Mm-hmm.
So I went searching for pictures of Mason, and I'm saying, are Ian's tattoos Mason's tattoos?
Were they?
Like, is this literally Mason getting to show off their tattoos?
Mm-hmm.
Or is this part of the character, styling that these are Ian's tattoos? And I didn't really have a definitive answer because in my head, I'm like, I know I've seen pictures of Mason's tattoos before.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I was looking for, was pictures of Mason's tattoos. And all the pictures I found were less tattoos. So I still don't have an answer. I don't know if more tattoos were added, as just makeup.
That would be interesting.
To show that is there some Ian specific references in these tattoos, or did Mason just get more tattoos since these other pictures I found? So I don't have an answer. If anybody knows, I'm actually very curious if these are, if this is just Mason style, or if we're getting some actual character input based on this. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I get what you're saying.
But while I was looking at those pictures, that's when I'm seeing pictures of Mason with Alice, and I was like, oh, wait a minute. So Alice Krummelberg is Mason Alexander Park's partner in real life. They are together, and that's probably how she ended up with this role.
Yeah, and given that, it would make sense that she would return.
Right. That we might see this character again.
Mm-hmm.
So that was just a little tidbit that we totally missed when we were talking about the episode. So I wanted to bring that up. And I hope we see her again. She is a great actress. And
she was definitely very good in that scene.
I'm enjoying The Sinner. So if anybody wants to check that out, she is in season 4 of that show.
Well, you convinced me. I'm going to go and check it out now.
My favorite of that was season 1. The mystery behind season 1 I really liked.
Mm-hmm.
Which was Jessica Biel.
Jessica Biel, yes.
Yeah, she's actually an executive producer on the series.
Is she now?
And she's the central character in the first season.
It's been a while since I've seen Jessica Biel in anything.
Yeah.
So. All right. Any other thoughts?
No, I think we covered it. This was a great episode of Quantum Leap. We've got 4 episodes left this season.
And next week will be the last one before I go on my little vacation.
Okay.
The one after that will be a little bit delayed. And by the way, I plan on taking plenty of video from my time in Seattle. So eventually, hopefully not as long as it took me to finish your wedding video, eventually you'll be able to see my trip, and I will treat Seattle like a crime scene. Like, you'll see every inch that I could possibly see of that city. So lots of things to look forward to. We would like to hear from you. What did you think of this podcast? What did you think of this episode? Stacie can be reached at...
I can be reached on Twitter at TVN Coupon Talk.
If you like this video and want to support the channel, there are a number of ways to do so. You can follow me on Twitter at Core Productions. You can join my Core Productions Facebook page. You can buy something from the Core Productions store on Zazzle. You can buy me a coffee, which is a new way to support content creators such as myself. And of course, you can like, share, and comment on this video, as well as subscribing to my channel. This is Dave and Stacie from Core Productions, signing off.